are my muscles able to work together, or am I developing a reliance on certain muscles to do the lion's share? And then I wonder why my back always feels tight and tense, or my shoulder always feels out because I've got those patterns of tension. So if you're experiencing things like postural imbalances, or coming back from an injury, or have been told that you need to do some sort of corrective exercise, stretch this, strengthen that, but your body still feels out of balance. You still have tension and pain that's there, and all of the things that you've tried aren't really helping. That's what today's conversation is about. We're going to talk about rehabilitating, rebalancing the body from a contextual perspective. So we want to look at this because it's so common in the rehab field. And this is to not negatively speak about anything, but more so to shed some light as to why some of these things don't always translate into your body feeling and moving better. They're well intended. However, there's some things that we've learned that can really make a big change to how your body moves and feels. So today we will talk about contextual rehab. As we go into this, we'll look at the common scenario. So let's say you've got a shoulder issue. Now, commonly with shoulder issues, we're given the cue, you've got to do exercise with like your shoulders back and down, and then do like external rotation movements to strengthen the scapula. And then when you do all of that and increase the reps and the load, then magically your shoulder should feel better. But I've experienced this, and I've worked with countless students who have also experienced this, that you do all that, but your shoulder still feels tight and tense after. It doesn't actually get better. Why is that? Now, what we want to look at and what we'll go into is that you might be using your shoulder. Let's say you work at a computer all the time, and you have your hand on the clicker on the mouse, and then over the course of the day, because your shoulder isn't strengthened for that position, or there's some sort of pattern of tension that's causing your shoulder to kind of contort and pull into like this pattern, for example. I'm exaggerating it just so you can see. Then all of this external rotation stuff, you've trained your shoulder to do it back here, but not actually develop stability when your arm is here. It seems really simple and obvious, but this isn't really being addressed in our mainstream rehabilitation field, I've noticed. So that's why we want to go into this, so then we can start to apply the movements that you are actually doing in your life, and doing them in such a way that it's not continually pulling your body out of balance. And so as we look at this common problem in rehab, we'll talk about three key areas that are really useful for you to look at. And if you can apply these principles to different practices, then it's much more likely that your body will feel and move better, and the imbalances that might keep building up and recreating themselves start to get less and less, and you feel and move more free. So the first thing that we want to look at, so I've talked about just as an example of the shoulder, but we can apply this with any joint, any area of the body. We want to first establish some awareness of movement. Like the key thing here is that if you do have muscle imbalances and you're not aware of them, and then you go and see a practitioner who then gives you exercises, and you still don't build awareness of your movement habits, then you bring in these rehab exercises, and they override the pattern that you're already doing unconsciously, likely. And so, like meditation, like any process of change, it starts in with process of awareness, where it's being able to see both on the inside and on the outside what is happening, what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, how I'm doing it, It's once we see that, then we can start to undo it.
Yeah, and also this seems pretty obvious, but often in rehab era, it's not really happening because of the lack of self-responsibility in a way.
Mm,
So because often the scenario is if someone goes into rehab or physiotherapy, the mindset often is, okay, I will go there, this guy or this woman will show me some exercise and then it will be better. And then it's often a matter of I'm doing this exercise right or wrong? If things are not getting better, often the thought pattern is, oh, maybe this exercise is not right, so this is the wrong exercise, or I'm doing it wrong. But there is no right or wrong movement. It's just like, am I aware of what's happening when I'm doing this movement?
mm,
And am I aware of what's happening when I experience this pain, this tension in my daily life? And then just to start reverse engineer, oh, how is this integrated in my whole body? So it's not about the area where it's happening, it's more like what's happening around this area, above and below, to just get a feeling, okay, how is the body communicating and how is movement transferred through the system? So
mm,
it's just opening up the lenses and just get a view of, yeah, the whole body itself and not just this specific area. Yeah, these are thoughts coming up to what's often happening. And it can be useful if you had an injury and there was some surgery going on. Yes, we need some specific focus on the area. But if there are chronic things happening and if we want to bring this injury further and reestablish full movement, we need to see the whole body as one. And then things can change and integrate.
mm, You bring up some really big points there. Particularly that piece on self-responsibility, really making that process of working with someone a collaborative process rather than like a dependent process where we're looking for, here we've got a problem. That problem is diagnosed with, you've got muscle imbalances or some sort of postural condition. And then you get a series of exercises of which someone else has taught you how to do, but then you have in your mind and you're trying to recall all these right, wrong ways of doing it. And then that can build this cycle of a lack of responsibility and trust in your body itself, in that my body is a self healing, self regulating vehicle. And I have the responsibility to learn how to work with it, get to know it, rather than see it as a problem that someone else comes in to save and fix, rather than, hey, let's work on this thing together because I'm interested in it, rather than my pains, my tensions are a problem. They're a signal letting you know, hey, you are not connected to me. You do not know me. Get to know me so we can work together. It's sort of a symptom of disconnection, and that is not addressed when we seek outside of ourselves someone to fix a problem that we are not taking full responsibility for. I know I
Yeah.
did it for a long time of like, I want someone to give me this answer, and yet my body was telling me all along, hey, you're carrying lots of stress. You're like trying to then ignore that stress, put exercise on top of the stress that you haven't addressed. And so inside I'm tense. I'm putting more pressure on that tension. And then I wonder why I'm not feeling more relaxed and at ease in my body, until I started to go, oh, okay, my perceptions of my body in a general perspective, I thought my body was against me, being highlighted. And
Yeah.
this is really common. And, like one of the first things I know that I face when I work with people, and I believe that you do as well, is that like there is work in reestablishing connection and trust in the body, because it's like I've experienced all these pains and tensions for so long that I feel like the body has let me down, and I don't even like have the manual on how to work with this thing because no one ever taught me.
Yeah, this is often happening most of the time if things are really in a chronic state.
Yeah.
Really reconnect and start to cooperate with the body and not trying to find the exercise which is changing now everything. This is not about exercise. This is about connect with yourself and connect with your whole system on a deeper level.
Mm.
This is a process and not a thing of doing X, Y, Z.
Mm. And also there are things that we can do that are practical as well. I suppose we're really addressing first this piece of your body's awesome and you can connect with it and learn stuff about it and start to engage in this feedback loop and be open and receptive to what your body is, the signals that your body is giving you. And so one simple thing that we can start with building awareness of movement is just connecting with all the joints piece by piece. We can look at, rather than if we've got a shoulder thing or a neck thing or a back thing or a hip thing or a knee thing or a whatever thing, we can start to look at how it is all interconnected by essentially becoming aware of the movement possibilities of each joint of the body. If we do that, then we can start to at least look at the interconnectedness of it. For example, if you're not aware of I had a guy ask me, is like doing chin tucks a good exercise for my posture? And but he wasn't really aware of what his thoracic spine was doing throughout the day, what his hips were doing, what his feet were doing. So, like, just the head, it's like the top of the structure, trying to force that back into balance. Like, let's say my thoracic doesn't move, and then I'm just like always pushing against the thoracic, which is always pushing against my lower back, which is always pushing against my hips, and so on and so forth. If I then notice, oh, okay, it's connected as a system, and oh, my hips aren't really moving so much, and my lower back is stuck in a place, and my thoracic spine isn't moving so much. What if I addressed all of those things piece by piece? And then, because maybe my neck is actually moving pretty well, it's just showing up symptomatically. We don't know until we have a look. We want to kind of create this sort of almost look at all of the parts, how they work together, so that then we can create this integrated structure that works as one, like you were saying. So that can be a simple way to get started of just looking at the joint by joint movement potential and then having some awareness of how the whole body works rather than I've got to stretch or strengthen just where I feel tense and just where I feel pain. Because it's like trying to purify the water of a river that is continually being polluted downstream or upstream. Like let's say there's like toxic waste always going in, and then you're trying to clean it down here and not addressing what's flowing downstream from it.
Yeah, in a way, in this example, the general rule of thumb can be the higher up the tension in the body is stuck, the more likely you also have to look what's happening downside.
Yeah.
Because it's just also a mechanism of the body stabilizing the system more upwards if something on in the lower body is not really stable.
Mm. So like, I suppose one last good example could be, like if you've got, say, neck troubles, instead of looking at what postural exercise or corrective exercise do I need to do for my neck, have a look at the jaw, how like the face and, like all the skull is moving. Have a look at the thoracic spine, like the two ends as a starting point. And then you could keep looking down and start to see, oh, okay, I forgot that, I injured my ankle repeatedly as a kid. And I've been forming movement compensations to move around that for 20, 30 years since then. And I never really drew the connection.
Yeah, and it can also just be because you've done some sports or some hobby which was really keeping up same movement patterns where the body will also get stuck. Yeah.
Well, that brings us into our next point, which is noticing patterns of tension.
Yeah.
And tension's not a bad thing, but what we can notice is that there are certain patterns, like you were saying before, Marcus, like to play a sport, each sport generally is made up of certain patterns that are repeated over and
Yeah.
over to become better at the sport, to become more efficient. And so often each pattern is like a groove. And the more we kind of move into that groove, then the deeper the groove becomes and the more stuck we get in that pattern. So it can be like the very thing that is supporting us to be efficient at one thing can then be leading to bigger problems in the broader context.
Yeah, we can make it pretty obvious if we just look at a pro athlete like playing ice hockey. It's very one-sided. So if a pro hockey player is doing this for many years, the body will create lines of tension to get more efficient in playing hockey. If it's right-handed or left-handed, doesn't matter. So in long term, to really keep this body efficient and not getting injured all the time is to really train to rebalance the body. So training for a pro athlete is not particularly to get better in playing hockey in this pattern. It's often more to give the body some space to rebalancing all those things he's doing all the time. And this is what is often overlooked in training and rehab also to, okay, what is this body used to do? So how is this body lined up? And what does this body need to rebalance this pattern of tension?
Mm.
Uh, and focus on this and not trying to get better on the thing which the body is already capable of doing it on a higher level.
And you can see, with any sport, if you see, for example, my background's in volleyball, so you could see the volleyballers from, when you're looking at a group of people that have spent a lot of time at volleyball tournaments, like the volleyballers are all sort of built in a similar way. They walk in a similar way. It's sort of
Yeah.
like if you were at a ballet concert, even when a ballet artist is not doing ballet, they still carry ballet in their system. It's sort of, it's a beautiful posture, but that program, that pattern gets so embedded into the system that the thing that is so graceful can also be detrimental in that everything is very tight and aligned all the time. It's not to say any of these things are bad, but we do get patternized by the things that we do repeatedly. And so if we can identify the actions that we're doing and how those patterns have built up. I experienced this also as I got into a lot of strength training. I loved a lot of weightlifting. I know that you've got a background in it as well. And so, like you look at the primary things that we're doing with that, like deadlifting, squatting, pressing, pulling, so like we're getting good at building tissue through all these big muscles, but I then didn't have access to all of these abilities for my joints to rotate and spiral, and I trained my body to be strong with a straight spine and a tense core, so I could do these actions. But it got to a point where there was so much rigidity then that was patternized in my system that it got to a point of kind of critical mass. And so I needed to then become aware of how have I patternized my body? What are the tension patterns that have built up? How can I start to offset them? It doesn't mean that any sport is bad. Doesn't mean that any activity is bad. Doesn't mean that weightlifting is bad. It means, can we look at the specific activity that we've been doing, that we've become patternized toward, and then the general things that the body needs to do to be able to provide more of a complete circle in the options that it can do, rather than just, I can only do this, and that's how I move all the time. I can then identify, oh, okay, when I go to move in this way, is just an example, that's where I start to feel resistance. That's often where we get a lot of room for ease, because then the pattern becomes a conscious choice rather than an unconscious prison that we've built.
And we can reconnect this to awareness. If we are more aware of what's happening, we feel when the body starts to get stuck in tension while we are doing, for example, squatting or deadlifting. And then we know, okay, if we keep going, tension will build up. If we make another choice, we can start to reestablish and get a chance to bring this tension again into the whole system. So it just comes back to awareness, and with this, we can do everything we want to do. As you mentioned, nothing is right or wrong. It's just also a matter of awareness and responsibility.
Yeah. And it can be, bringing it back to practical things, it can be as simple as letting yourself break the rules of the patterns that you think are right in the particular thing that you do. Like if I look at strength training, there's a whole glossary of cues that get taught as to the right way to do exercises, but they can become patternized cages that the body gets stuck in. So as an example, with a squat, it's like knees out, like hips tilted, don't bring your knees over your toes, all of these cues. What you can start to do is loosen them off. It doesn't mean that, when you, for example, knees out, what if you then start to explore knees in or not fully pushed out? Then you've got more options to adjust. It doesn't mean that with your knees in, it's going to be as optimal for, lifting maximal weight, but it means that you're starting to create more options rather than your body just gets patternized into this rigid pattern that you can get stuck in. Or you might start to, for example, deadlift with a straight back. Of course, that is an optimal position to lift maximal weight. But again, if you're not training and developing your body so that then it can move with a rounded back, then there is a missing piece of the puzzle where you can get stuck. So these sorts of things can mean that you don't necessarily need to do rehab exercises. You can start to look at the movements that you're currently doing and then start to look at, how can I change these patterns and give myself more options, and then build from there. And that way we don't have to always go, oh, in order to address these muscle imbalances, then you need to stop what you're doing and then do all these extra little fiddly exercises. Like, yes, isolated movements can be helpful in some contexts. And also the message here is, look at what you're doing and look at how you can create more options to do it. So then you've got a more adaptive structure that's not just fixed in one pathway.
Yeah, and not start doing this with maximum weight.
Totally. So, of course, like every new variation of a joint position will then have a new learning cycle. So it's important that you start to build up and progressively build up tolerance to that. Like as an example, I was speaking with a friend recently, and he was having trouble. I talked about this example earlier of, each time, and I observed it as he was going to pick up a teapot, he didn't have stability when he was in that position to even lift the teapot. And so his shoulder would do that. And so one of the ways that I was talking to him about how can we start to rehab that is start to, get a load in the hand, a load that he can tolerate, and then start to, okay, here's the position where the pattern of tension is expressed, then start to develop stability through that full range while you're loaded. And so that is then contextual to the movement that he wants to do. And so we identified that pattern of tension, and then we started to rebalance it. We didn't have to do all of this stuff and this stuff because it wasn't contextual to the actual situation that was pulling him out of balance. And it just so happens that that was happening when he was doing push-ups, that was happening when he was at work, that would happen a whole heap of
Yeah.
times. Yeah. So the other ways that maybe we can talk in depth about in future as well, when we're looking at patterns of tension, there can also be mental patterns of tension and emotional patterns of tension as well. And so this is kind of the really in the realm of how we're perceiving the body, how we're perceiving different sensations and all of that sort of stuff. So if internally we are doing things and then that's causing all of these internal contractions and tensions to build up, let's say we have a fearful association with our body in general, or with an injury that has happened in the past. And then as we go into that area, then the body starts to freeze up and the nervous system starts to lock down. Then we want to observe those patterns of tension as well. So with how we associate with different areas of the body, because the body stores and can hold memory of different experiences. And so that those experiences, if they're traumatic particularly, and that they can be physical, mental, or emotional, and they have physical effects. So if we can observe those patterns of tension in context to when you're doing something, when you're moving in particular ways, then we can also start to unravel those patterns as well.
Yeah, and this is often also overlooked in rehab because there's often no time and space to look at things from this layer.
Yeah.
And something is really in a chronic state, there is no other chance that also a mental emotional trigger happening. And if you not start looking at things from this perspective, and also build some awareness for emotions and thought patterns, it's really difficult to regulate the system back that the tension is fading out and the body's running more efficiently without this pain and tension.
Yeah, yeah. Like a lot of these sorts of issues are often not tissue related. So if you do experience things where, maybe you have had an injury in the past or a physical trauma that has happened, and then your body had to sort of tense up in order to protect itself, but then the tissue is healed, but still there is not an experience of safety when you go to move again, because what can happen is consciously or unconsciously, we can recall that event that has happened. And so then it's like, oh, if I move, then unsafe. Alarm bells go off, all the survival mechanisms kick in. So this is where stretching and strengthening just as a focal point is not that effective in this case. Often we need to be able to notice when that experience comes in, and then be able to start to reassociate, oh, okay, I am safe in this position. And then we can start to titrate, move in and out. So then we establish a safe zone of movement. And then gradually, as we keep meeting that experience, the alarm bells don't go off so much, then the body can start to open up. But it opens up kind of from the inside out in that case, rather than a muscle getting longer or even fascial tissue getting unbound. Like that may happen as well over time, but it's those internal experiences of a movement or an area of your body that we want to kind of relinquish those protective patterns that let the body open up. And it can really, like, if you have felt like there's an area on lockdown, if we start to, let's say we become aware of it, and then we just simply breathe and just become aware of what's going on, and then we start to see, oh, okay, that threat that was then isn't here now. I don't need to protect myself from this. Like, you can see it all, rather than if you don't identify that, then it can sort of operate under the surface, and then we can try and push past it. But then inside, it's like, why is this? Why do I feel like I'm pushing against my body here? So we can unravel that, and that's one of the common ways and how it can present in the case of physical traumas and chronic conditions that are happening within.
Yeah. And often it's really obvious in the beginning if something is happening all the time and you just start observing your thought patterns according to this era of the body and the emotions coming up, then you know, okay, this is no longer just a physical thing. This is also a mental, emotional thing. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this again. I'm really pissed off that this is still hanging around and blah, blah, blah. So it's pretty obvious in the beginning also.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, that kind of, and we've been talking to this a little bit, but we'll dive into it a little bit more of the third area to look at if we want to really start to rehab the body is contextual stability. So, where we're looking at basically is, how do you want to move your body in the context of your life? How are you currently moving it? And then, are you stable in the ways that you want to move your body? Because everyone's going to be different. For me, I want my body to be really prepared for anything, which means that I'm not awesome at really anything. I'm just like pretty good at most things. You know, if I want to go rock climb, I can go rock climb. And, you know, there's, unless I'm doing something reckless, there's a fairly low chance of injury, you know, because I've looked at, like, my grip is strong, all of my muscles move well, all of my joints move well. So I can put my body in different positions. I'm not the best rock climber, and if I wanted to be, then I might need to start to kind of more dig in those grooves and those patterns to get better. If I want to go for a run, not the best runner, but can do it again without injury, because my body can sort of adapt and adjust. I'm not saying any of this to say I'm good, but more so it's like about context for what do you want to do. If you just want to be able to, like, move around your daily life, play with your kids, or you know, take your pets for a walk, you know, like be able to do your job, maybe have some hobbies, and like feel good and age well, and so your body kind of keeps supporting you more gracefully through life, then look at how you would like to move, and then start to develop stability, or like a range of stability for those activities. You know, for example, when you're walking, you know, if you don't feel stable when your foot's like here and here and here, well, then when you go for a walk and you get in unbalanced terrain, then it's like everything's going to start to clamp up because, oh, I can't go this way, I can't go that way. I've just got to be in this perfect sort of thing. So we look at stability in context to what you're doing, and generally build a bit more either side, so you've got a bit more of a buffer zone.
Yeah. And the food example is a perfect example for nearly everyone in modern society, because our foot is just, and ankles are just used to flat surface, wearing shoes all the time. So if things are going this way, often the system is unstable from the first moment.
Mm,
Uh, and yeah, just looking at those little things will change a lot for the whole body. It's not about ankle or foot, it's just about the whole body upward will benefit from just becoming aware of this little thing and give the body time and space to adapt. And this is happening all the time for everything you do.
mm.
It's just a perfect example which will, yeah, affect the whole system.
I've done quite a lot of work with martial artists, and a common thing, you know, when I observe the way they move when they come to do some work with me, in the context of, you know, I want to punch better, I want to kick better, I want to move better in my martial arts, but I feel stuck, I feel tight, you know, that sort of stuff. I observe the way they move, and often that would involve some sort of demonstration of a form, throwing of a punch, throwing of a kick. depending on whether we're working together online or in person, one of the common things that I would look at is, as they're throwing the punch, as they're throwing the kick, I would test their structure to see their stability, their groundedness in that activity. So they might have like thrown a punch or thrown a kick, and then if they were to get a light bit of force and they can be thrown off balance easily, well, then they lose all their power. You can't project power if you're not stable and connected to the ground. And
Yeah.
so no amount of sort of like exercises to generate more force, stronger muscles and all that sort of stuff will be as effective at that point if you're not stable and connected with the ground. And so it's like, and this is one thing that I learned when exploring internal martial arts, is like establishing that groundedness, that connectedness with the ground, where your weight has sunk into the ground. So then you're like a tree that has deep roots, rather than sort of like an upside down pyramid that's always fighting for stability. And it just takes one little and you've lost your base. You're no longer effective.
The perfect way to look at from a pragmatic perspective, if you go into Himalayas and you see the Sherpas doing the work, they are pretty small and tiny people in a way, and not really muscular. But when you look at them, how much weight they lift up the mountain, and you see all the Western athletes walking behind them with packed and fully trained in Western perspective, you can see the difference between grounded and connected and just being trained more from a Western philosophy.
Yeah, totally, totally. And it's like that. It's a really good example of course, there's an aerobic adaptation that comes with, that the Sherpas have. And also there's that structural integrity where, as they're carrying the weight, it's moving through their whole body rather than just relying on big, strong muscles. You see this, I love martial arts movies, particularly where you have like the Western guy, and he's like, huh, yeah, huh, and like all very strong. And then you've got the old martial arts master, often like a Chinese guy that's just like, and of course it's a movie, but the principle here is present of like, where does your power really come from? Is it from any one area, or is it from actually being able to use your structure as a
Yeah.
whole? And so that's kind of some of the things that we mean around contextual stability, as to, do we have stability in the activities that we're doing? Do you have an integrated structure where all of the joints have capacity to move or not move? And then how do you carry your body in space in the activity that it is that you're doing?
Yeah. And then you will maybe get stronger without having all those big muscles,
Yeah.
because you're using the body as a intelligent system.
Yeah, yeah. And it's definitely not to take away from, having muscles, because, like muscle is important. We're looking at it through the lens of your whole system working together. So like
Yeah.
if we overly focus on training any one muscle too much, it's important to just consider, what is the cost of that? We want to have a good base of muscle, which we can develop through more integrated movements. And, that can support the longevity of the body, but not so much muscle that it's causing constriction to the flow of lymphatic fluid, of blood and oxygen, all the nutrients through the body. So it's finding a balance there, but particularly looking at, are my muscles able to work together, or am I developing a reliance on just certain muscles to do the lion's share? And then I wonder why my back always feels tight and tense, or my shoulder always feels out, because I've got those patterns of tension. So all in all, if we look at this to sum up, so if you are experiencing imbalances, postural imbalances, if you're going through a process of rehabbing from an injury, if you're experiencing like chronic tensions that doing little rehab exercises or foam rolling or stretching and strengthening one little individual area hasn't seemed to be correcting or addressing, then we want to look at first establishing awareness of movement. So looking at your body as a whole, looking at it joint by joint, understanding how things are interconnected, observing the areas that are maybe not moving with the whole system, looking above and below areas of pain and tightness rather than just hyper focusing on where you feel the tension. We want to work with different patterns of tension, and particularly honoring, your own background of movement, the movements that you've done in your sports, in your hobbies, in your day-to-day life, how those patterns have developed, maybe as a result of compensation from injuries over the years, and all sorts of different experiences whether you've had traumatic experiences that have caused different mental, emotional tensions in different areas of your body, working with those different patterns of tension, and particularly looking at establishing a sense of safety in those different areas of the body moving, and some options to, if you're used to moving kind of in this channel, look either side of that. If you always been habituated to my knees have to be over my toes, then you might start to look at developing some ability to move past those patterns of tension so there's some more space as you move. And then the last point is to look at contextual stability. So developing a sense of stability that's relative to the things that you want to do now, and then the life that you want to continue to live, the activities that you would like to continue to do, to track forward and to look at, do I have the stability to support those activities where I don't, if if I really like drinking tea and every time I go to lift the teapot, I'm doing this, do we have some degree of contextual stability to do that? Because that might then come out as I go to play tennis. That might come as I go to do any activity, work at a computer, even if it is that you are working at a desk, do you have enough stability so that then you've got some space posturally to carry yourself throughout the day without kind of, your structure habituating to a certain position over the day, and then you build this pattern of tension and you add it up over the years. So developing a sense of stability in your body that's contextual to the things that you like to do. And so these do require some sense of inquiry as to, what would I like to do with my body? What are the things that I enjoy? What would I like to do more of? Can I focus on doing those things and developing those patterns so I get better at that activity, if that's what you want to do, but then also have enough general stability and movement capacity so that then I have options. So I don't always need to just get stuck in this groove, and then the body starts to say, hey, you're stuck in a groove. I would like some more options. And then we can start to just move through life with a more graceful quality is the idea here. Any final words?
Yeah, this sounds now pretty complex and pretty complicated, maybe because we talked a lot, but in a way it's pretty simple. Just start off with this simple choice of, oh yeah, I wanted to get to know myself and my body, and then check out our app Movement Plus, and you will guide you through. And you will see this is pretty simple and really easy to bring into daily life and to integrate in your actual training you're doing or in your actual rehab.
Yeah, I think that's good parting words. And the goal here is that we're inviting you into the core principles underneath these practices, and the intent is to open up your perspective as to how your body can actually be balanced, and that we don't always have to be doing all these little exercises and kind of chasing this rainbow of having a balanced body that never happens. We balance it contextually to the things that we like to do, and that's the core of it. So thanks for listening. I hope it's been helpful, and looking forward to just seeing how you move through life and improving that experience.
Yeah. Thanks, and bye.